Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
We talked about Maimonides' ideas about God. God is eternal. God is outside nature and time. God has a unity that is unlike any other unity. God has a singularity that is unlike any other singularity. Anything we say about God is a metaphor based on our human limited brains and language, whether it's saying that God has a physical presence or God has an emotional presence. All that is metaphoric only. The only thing we can say for certain about God is that we don't know anything for certain about God. Okay, I think that's basically my summary of Rambam. I'm sure Rabbi Rambam will have much more to say about it. And we talked some 2 weeks ago about, on the one hand, this is very elevated, and I don't know, I'm trying to think of another synonym, if anyone else can. Elevated and lofty. And on the other hand, it can also leave you cold. We raised the question, well, then does God care? Well, then why pray to God? God knows what God's going to do. God doesn't change. And so what's the point of anything we do? Which are some of the questions that we're going to ask Rabbi Rambam. So today what we're going to look at is two piyutim. Piyutim are liturgical poems. They're poems that are written for purposes of insertion somewhere in prayer. And they're two piyutim that we all know, probably by heart, if you're a regular shul goer, Yigdal and Adon Olam. And we're going to see how these are actually medieval prayer poems, or piyutim, liturgical poems, which are based on the theology that we studied in Rambam in chapter 1 of Rambam's laws of the foundation of the Torah. We'll see how those, his philosophical thinking has become encoded in poetic form. Okay? Now, the first one we'll look at is Yigdal. Yigdal is explicitly based on Maimonides. Yigdal was written about 1300 in Italy. So take a step back. Something we didn't study from Maimonides is in Maimonides' introduction, commentary on the Mishnah, in his introduction to chapter 10 of Tractate Sanhedrin, Maimonides tells us, and you've heard this phrase before, his 13 principles of faith. And he basically says, if you don't believe all 13 of these things, you are a heretic, right? This is my definition of what it means to be a Jew. Now, I just want to say, lots of people criticized then and now the enterprise of medieval Jewish philosophy in attempting to say Jews must believe X, Y, and Z, because if you think back to things we've studied and you've studied before in Torah and rabbinics, there's very little about which it says, if you don't believe this, you're a bad Jew. There are lots of things that say, if you don't keep this mitzvah, you're a bad Jew. Okay, but mitzvahs are commandments to do things rather than beliefs. A belief means it's just something in your head or in your heart, if you want to use that metaphor. But medieval philosophy tried to say, no. There are principles that you're supposed to believe, and if you don't believe them, you're a heretic. Rambam codified 13 of them, and these 13 were explicitly made into Yigdal, which, if you ever wondered why Yigdal has 13 lines, and when we sing it, we have to repeat the last one to make it 14 so that it comes out musically into couplets, the reason is because there are 13 principles of faith in Maimonides. Okay? And I shall screen share. Here we are. Okay. Everyone sees that. Just give me a wave. Michael, you see it? Okay. All right. So, by the way, I took this from Sefaria. It's from the Metzuda Siddur. And in the Metzudah Siddur, the translator, into English, name is Rabbi Davis, I don't remember his first name, actually has done us the favor of telling you what is the principle of Maimonides that is encoded in that line. I'm actually sort of sorry that I brought you this translation, because it would have been more fun if we would have just extracted the principle from the line in Yigdal. So I'm going to ignore the English a lot. Yigdal Elohim Chai V'Yishtabach, right? Mighty God lives and is praiseworthy. Nimtza Ve'ein Eit El Metziuto. All right, Nimtza in modern Israeli means found, but he is found, but it's actually a technical philosophical term. It means God's existence is unlike any other existence. God is the Nimtza. And then God is referred to as the Mamtzi, the creator, and God causes everything else to exist. And the Ein Eit, time, that means God's existence is outside of time. Remember we said for all bodies, what fancy English translators of medieval philosophy call corporeal things, all things with bodies, exist in time. There is a time when my body didn't exist. There's a time when my body is not going to exist. We can't say that about God. God was there before it's not just God created everything. God was there before all the stuff, which we read in Rambam, but also as we read in Maimonides, God was there before time. Now, don't ask me to explain that to you. Okay, this is a very abstract concept because we live in time. So I think it's pretty hard for us to conceive of what does that mean to say something exists outside of time. So God is the primary exister and exists outside time. Number two, Echad ve'ein yachid ki yichudo. God is singular and there is nothing singular like him. So we could say Avi is unique because there's no one who's ever existed like me before or again, but I'm composed of all kinds of parts, right? And the parts make up me. And somehow God's uniqueness is very different than my uniqueness. And we also read about that God does not have parts. God is the unity in fundamental ways that human beings are not a unity. And again, I apologize. This is philosophical language. If it sounds like gibberish to some people, I can't do any better than that. Ne'elam, God is invisible. V'gam ein sof la'achduto. It's actually a little bit paradoxical. He is infinitely singular, or infinitely, it says here, his unity is infinite. Number three, God has no body or any likeness to a body, and nothing can be compared to God's holiness. Okay? So we can't even say God is like this. Oh, the Torah is holy, but God is a million times holy, a million times the Torah. You can't say that. Okay? So God is the difference between God and anything else in the world is not a difference of degree or quantity. It's a difference of quality. There is nothing like God. Again, God cannot be compared to anything. This is Maimonides' idea that the only thing we can say for sure about God is that we can't say anything for sure about God, because anything we thought we would say for sure is based on human language, which is based on our conceptions, and God is beyond our conceptions. So God is beyond time, beyond anything we can conceive of, and a unity in a way in which nothing else in the world is a unity. And that unity is singular. There is nothing else like it. Kadmon l'chol davar asher nivra, rishon ve'ein reshit l'reshito. God was the first of everything that was created. God was before everything was created, right? As we read in Rambam. God was the first, but there is no beginning to his firstness. Meaning you can't say, there's the world, God was there before the world. So we could say, according to Maimonides or the Bible, or maybe physics. Here's the beginning of the universe, some moment in time. God existed before that beginning of the universe because God created the universe. God caused it to be. But you can't ask, was there a before to God? Is there a before and after in God? And by the way, we know that because of principle number 1. Ein et el mitziyuto. There is no temporal or time-bound aspect to God's existence. So God was before everything, but God's beforeness is timeless. Hino Adon Olam l'chol notzar, yoreh gedulato umalchuto. God is the master of the universe for all creatures. God created everything. By the way, some editions say this is a mistake, yoreh, because yoreh means to show. All creatures show God's greatness. Some scholars say this is actually a change and an error, and it's originally yodeh, which makes more sense. Yodeh means to acknowledge, meaning God is the master of everything, and everything should acknowledge God's greatness. Okay? If you understand all this stuff about God, then it is inevitable that as a creature, you will acknowledge God's greatness. What is the greatness? That God is fundamentally unlike anything we know. God is a unity in a way that nothing else is a unity. God is beyond space and time and has no physical existence. Okay. Then, by the way, we have, 1 second, Michael. I just want to say, then we have the rest of Maimonides' 13 principles, which we haven't talked about because we're not focusing on that in this class. We're focusing on God, understandings of God. But just to zip through the other principles, right? God gave prophecy. The greatest prophet of all is Moses. God revealed the Torah. The Torah is unchangeable and eternal. God sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. And number 10, God sees into all of your thoughts and feelings. There will be reward and punishment. There is belief in the Messiah coming at the end of time, and there will be resurrection of the dead. So these are others of Maimonides' principles of faith that if you don't believe them, you're a heretic, you're not a good Jew, okay? But they're the ones that are not about the nature of God, and so we're not going to focus on them. Michael, unmute. Got to unmute.
Hang on.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
That yoreh may make sense also because if it means show in the sense of demonstrate,
yeah,
then it could be saying that the mere existence of creatures on earth demonstrates God's existence and God's greatness.
Beautiful. Great. Okay. Any thoughts or comments? This is, and we're going to ring off on Yigdal in a moment. Any thoughts, questions, or comments about these ideas about God? Does it make sense for those of you who were with us the 2 weeks where we read Maimonides, Division 1, Book 1, Chapter 1? These are the fundamental ideas of faith about God. It all kind of makes sense, right? And it's put in poetic form and rhyming. Notice mitziyuto, achduto, kedushato, reshito, malchuto, tifarto. So there's a rhyme scheme, but of course the rhyme scheme has meaning to it also. It writes third person masculine. We're talking about attributes of God or qualities of God. Terry, I think you liked Rambam last time. Do you like this? Not?
Yeah, no, I do.
Okay. It's very and hard to grasp, right? I mean, yeah. This is philosophy, and Maimonides is saying we are trying to talk about something that we cannot grasp, okay? And the reason we can't grasp it is because our human experience and apparatus is limited, and so we use our limited equipment to try to describe that which we cannot describe and try to understand that which we cannot understand. Okay. There's also a meter scheme in here, but I'm not going to do that because we don't have time for that. Early piyut generally doesn't have meter, but medieval piyut, which is influenced by Arabic piyut, has meter to it. Adon Olam is easier to see than meter. Okay, Adon Olam, we don't know when it was written. I made it a little broad here. It's probably like 1,000, 1,100-ish, something like that. Okay? And this is based on the same medieval Jewish philosophical principles. It's not based on the 13 attributes of faith. And you'll see there's nothing about, prophecy or the Torah or reward and punishment. It may be implied, but it's not, right? And that's why it's not 13 lines. And it may actually have been written before Rambam. Okay. So I can't say this is based on Rambam, but I think it describes more or less the same philosophical ideas with its own things. Okay. Adon Olam Asher Malach. By the way, Olam, which we translate as world, or if we're more modern, universe, really means infinity in its core original meaning. And it can mean infinity in space, which is why we call it world or universe. It can also mean infinity in time. So another translation for Adon Olam would be eternal master or infinite Lord, really. Okay. And infinity could be, that's an ambiguous term. It could be time. It's not time or space. It's both. Okay. So infinite ruler, Asher Malach, when was God ruler? B'terem kol yitzir nivra, right? God was God before the universe was created. Creature here doesn't mean just like, life forms. It means anything that was created, which would include, animal, what do we say in that guessing game? 20, animal, vegetable, and mineral. Okay? So it includes living animal creatures and plant creatures and stuff, rocks, H2O, everything is a yitzir, right? So God was eternal Lord, but even before everything, le'et na'asa b'chevtzo kol, and at the time when, according to his will, everything got created, then he was proclaimed king, azai melech shemoni kra. So God was king, but there is no one around to say, hey, you're king, until there were creatures. Okay? Ve'acharei kichlot hakol, and when everything is over, that means the whole universe, when it all collapses back into an infinitely dense point, or whatever will happen at the end of universe time, will God still be there? Yeah. Livado yimloch nora. He alone, God, I want to try to ungenderize it as much as possible in English. God alone will reign as the awesome one. Notice, by the way, the trick that you might not have noticed that the author put in. First line, malach. Second line, melech. Third line, yimloch, right? Which encodes the idea that God was, is, will be. 3 tenses. Was, is, will be. Which is how some actually renewal people translate the untranslatable, unpronounceable name of Yud, Hey, and then Vav, Hey. They translated it was, is, will be, right? Because that root means, right? So God is being, God's exists before the universe and after the universe. And, in case you missed, Malach, Melech, and Yimloch, in the next line, which connects it with God's 4-letter name, same root, V'hu haya, v'hu hoveh, v'hu yiyeh b'tifara. God was, God is, and God will be. So God is eternal, and there's nothing different about God at this moment in our time in the universe than there was before the universe or after the universe. This is God's eternality. V'hu echad v'ein sheni. Doesn't mean there aren't two gods. It means God is singular. Ein sheni lahamshilo lahachbira. Okay, there's nothing to which you can compare God. So God is unique. All right, God is unique, and there's nothing else to which you can compare God. Beli reshit, beli tachlit. God has no beginning and no end. Again, God is beyond time. Vilo ha'oz v'hamisra, and rulership is God's. So God is both exists, but God is all powerful. And this is actually a change from some of the themes we've been talking about, not an argument, but the author of Adon Olam is going to have a different emphasis or point that the author is going to get. So the preamble is God is eternal. God is beyond space. God is beyond space in the sense that God created the whole universe. So before there was a universe, there was God. Outside of the universe, there was God. But even the words before and outside are actually meaningless, okay, because they imply that there's a place out there, but there is no place. Okay, so God isn't in a place. God isn't in a time. Okay, so God is infinite. This is how God is Adon Olam. Okay, by the way, this really suggests to us that the sense of Olam that the author is thinking of is more about infinity in time than infinity in space, right? Because this whole first half is about, although God did create everything, it's really about God as being beyond time, more so than God is outside the world. That kind of goes without saying, okay? And then we get to some other things, which it's not that Rambam would disagree with them, but they're not ideas about God. They're not just philosophical ideas about God, but rather about God and the world. And so and by the way, this is, I actually think, literarily magnificent, kind of jaw-dropping. So that God, who is singular, unique, beyond space, beyond time, okay, incomparable. He said all the same things over and over again. Hu Eli v'chai go'ali. That same entity is my deity and it's hard to translate, my eternal Savior. Okay, go'ali means redeem. Again, in English, we always say redeemer because we don't want to say savior, but it means literally to save, protect and save in a physical way. So this entity that I talked about, that I call God, who's outside of space and time and is infinite and indivisible, has no body, et cetera, is my deity and my eternal protector. Vitzur chevli be'et sarah, and the rock of my destiny. Chevel means my portion. It sometimes has a physical meaning, like the portion of land you were given, and when you inherited land in ancient times. And if anyone, and Terry, what does it mean in modern Israeli? A chevel, sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot. A rope. And the reason it means a portion of land is because that's how they measured out portions of land in ancient times. There was a rope of a fixed official length, presumably fixed by the elders or the king or common law or whatever, and that is how they measured out that you had a certain amount of land. So that's how it gets to mean portion of land, because it means my rope measured land. Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, there's also geographic designations in the land of Israel that are called Hevel this and Hevel that.
Right, because it means portion, area. Right. Yeah. So then it comes to mean area. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's call it portion. Okay. God is the rock of my portion. And of course, what does that imply? Rock implies immovable, immutable, solid, reliable, dependable, but is mine. This is my portion, me, the davener. When is God my portion of rock, the rock of my portion? Be'et sarah, when I am in a jam, when I'm in distress. V'hu nisi umanos li. Very nice pun, two words that sound similar but mean totally different things. Nes, which we usually understand to mean miracle, also means a standard. A standard is like a banner, okay? And there were standards so that like the troops would know where to gather, or, like tour guides. Follow me, okay? So, and of course it is a double entendre, because if God saves me when I'm in a jam, sometimes I will refer to that as a miracle, okay? But it means here that God is my flag, he is my flag and my refuge. I don't know what that means in English, but that's what it means. So Nes is a standard or a banner, and Manos is a place to flee to. Okay. Menat kosi biomekra, the portion of my cup. It's a metaphor. Okay. When I call out. So when I need God, then my portion of land, my portion poured out in my cup, is a tzur, it's a rock, it's a banner, it's a refuge. So now we're talking about this deity outside the universe, all that stuff, and now we're talking about my personal relationship. This is the paradox in theology of God's transcendence and God's immanence. Remember, we said we want to ask Rabbi Rembbaum, so why pray to God if God is outside all that and unchangeable? And the author of Adon Olam does not seem troubled by that question. Okay? Infinite God outside of space and time, you are my refuge. Although the author is not saying you, the author is saying third person. Okay? And therefore, it follows logically, Biyado afkid ruchi be'et ishan ve'a'ira. In God's hand, I entrust my soul when I go to sleep and when I awake. Ve'im ruchi giviati, and with my soul also my body. Adonai li v'lo ira. God is with me, or God is mine. By the way, again, the name of God here, I want to point out, it's not El, it's not Elohim, it's God's unpronounceable four-letter name, which takes us back to V'hu haya, v'hu hoveh, v'hu yeh, right? Let's call it the timeless God is with me. The timeless, infinite God is with me. If you wanted to give Adon Olam like a conceptual title, you might call it The Infinite God Protects Me, and where I put my trust in the infinite God. Now, this is why, by the way, for those who look in the Siddur at the bedtime Shema, Adon Olam is part of the bedtime Shema service. Kind of makes sense when it is, right? And this is why it's a wake-up prayer and it's a go-to-sleep prayer, okay? Because we're saying, I rely on God. God is reliable. God is my rock, right? So God has the capacity and desire to care for me. That is implied, because otherwise, why would I rely on God? Okay. And then when I do that, I'm not afraid, right? So this is a very interesting poem about God's transcendence and immanence. The transcendence is, I think, more or less the transcendence of Rambam's God, right? It's not like Rambam made up that idea. Rambam crystallized this idea in Jewish medieval philosophy, okay? Again, I don't think it means other Jewish medieval philosophers would disagree with Rambam. I think they would agree with Rambam, although we'll ask Rabbi Rembbaum that question also. Were there disagreements with Rambam? Or is Rambam a good spokesperson for the whole medieval Jewish rationalist philosophy school? Okay. So our author takes that transcendent God, and then he connects that transcendent idea to essentially, the biblical God of the Psalms. God is my rock and my redeemer, my protector. I call out to God when I'm in trouble, and implied in that is, doesn't say it, implied in that is, I can rely on that. I know that God is listening and God will protect me. And then we have this interesting turn at the end, which, in Tehillim and Psalms, it would be, either my enemies gathering around me will be scattered, or I will come to the temple and I will acknowledge you and thank you. But that's not where it goes. It goes to this really interesting line about acknowledging our creatureliness, right? And our, I guess that's just my word, creatureliness. And God, you take care of my body and my soul. Not when I'm working as a psychiatrist in my office, because when I'm working as a psychiatrist in my office, I don't push religion on people. But, if I'm talking to parents, like, child development stuff, but in a Jewish context, rabbinic context, this is very useful. Kids at a certain age, a lot of them, they're afraid to go to sleep at night. It's dark. It's scary. There could be robbers under the bed or monsters in the closet. And this is a prayer of calming. It's, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And, 9,999 times out of 10,000, I'm going to wake up in the morning, even though we know that is not true 100% of the time. But we face life, whether it's waking up or going to sleep, with a sense of security, personal security. And again, I just want to show you the juxtaposition in this poem, which to me is kind of mind-blowing. I feel my sense of personal security and trust and safety because I rely on part one, this infinite being. I can't even use the word being, right? That is outside of time and space and is indescribable and is not like anything else I know. You could say, of course, well, that's what provides the security, because God's security is unlike any other kind of security, because God is unlike anything else. But again, I think it's taking this very abstract idea about God and then connecting it to something very personal. Okay. I'm going to pause for a few minutes.
Yes, I'm intrigued by the use of the word flag and your explanation of a banner where that would cause you to rally around or to go to.
Yes.
So it occurs to me that what that implies, I think, is that that God becomes your focus and your guidance.
Yes. Yep. Good. So that's I'm going to call it sort of metaphoric understanding. And by the way, if you ask, like, where does this image come from? Did the poet make it up? The answer is no. We actually have passages in the prophets that talk about the ingathering of the exiles. There are passages that say, and God, right? God sent Moses to do the first taking out of Egypt, but God is going to go God's self to gather the exiles, which will be like a second Yetziat Mitzrayim, a second Exodus from Egypt, and God is going to raise a standard, banner. Why does God need to raise a banner? Because those exiles are scattered all far and wide, and they got to be able to see where the gathering point is, okay? Just like knowing where your tour guide is if you're in a crowded tourist spot, right? So it's a way to gather, okay? And then I think I agree with you. I'm sure that's where the author gets the image from, because that's where we have it in the Bible. And by the way, we don't use that word nes, if you remember, in the Chumash, if you remember earlier in the book of Numbers, when they're gathering, what's the word for they gather under the banners? It's the more common word for flag, which is degel. Okay, so the word nes, I think, does not appear in the Chumash. It is in the prophets. It's a way to gather people and provide a focus in a physical way. And I think, yes, it's used here in a metaphoric way. This makes God my organizing principle. But then it flips. Nisi u manos, and manos means my refuge, right? Right. Once I make God as my focus and I'm gathered with presumably this other group of people who are gathering, that then becomes my refuge. I'm protected. Sur chevli, right? Who wouldn't want to have a rock as again, by the way, sur doesn't just mean rock. It means, if you look at the prophets, it means really more the Psalms. It means like a rocky fortress. It's these places in the wilderness of Judea, where there's a Herod or someone else, built a fort atop some rocky crags, right? It's not just that it's hard, it's that it's unreachable and unconquerable. So sur doesn't just mean like, oh, he's unmovable, like a big rock, like levitated mass, that giant boulder thing at the LA County Art Museum. So it connotes solidity, immovability, but it's also meant to be like a rocky, unconquerable fortress. Other thoughts? Again, it's interesting to notice, again, these images, which are physical things and what they connote. A standard, a refuge. Refuge also means that sometimes, manos is sometimes translated as a hiding place. Okay, sur, right? Other thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, so these are two Piyutim, Yigdal explicitly based on Maimonides' ideas, with 13 lines. Adon Olam not, but the first half of Adon Olam, I would argue, is really based on the exact same Jewish medieval philosophical principles that we read in Maimonides about God. Okay, next week we're going to take a break from this. We're going to do some Tisha B'Av related stuff in the week before Tisha B'Av, and it's 9 a.m. and everyone have a good day, stay healthy, do mitzvahs, be Torah.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.